What's up, bodyweight warriors, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to cover a topic that I get asked actually all the time, and I've yet to kind of summarize my thoughts into one place. I thought this would be a great video to do it. So we're going to talk today about soreness and stretching. We're going to answer the questions: should stretching feel sore? Should it be some pain or discomfort? Can flexibility training make you sore? Does stretching in particular help to reduce that soreness sensation after training, so that delayed onset muscle soreness? And finally, should you stretch if you are feeling sore? All pretty good questions, but I thought this one video can kind of answer all of them. So let's jump straight into it. Right, so first up, let's cover, should stretching be painful? Very simple answer, it shouldn't be painful. I think I joke on this channel a lot. I talk about embracing the suck or suffering when it comes to training. And that's part of training in general. There should be, and there is going to be, some discomfort. We need to push ourselves, we need to push our limits. But when it comes to flexibility work, when it comes to stretching, I think people perhaps blur the lines between painful and discomfort, because there shouldn't be pain. When we're doing flexibility work, when we're doing stretching, we're actually trying to communicate with our body. We're not necessarily just trying to stretch out some fascia. There can be physical structural limitations, but oftentimes it's more of a neurological limitation. The stretch feeling, that stretch reflex is actually a spinal cord reflex. When a muscle lengthens, the muscle spindle is stretched, and therefore the nerve activity increases. This causes those muscle fibers to contract, stop you from going any further. This is the stretch reflex. This is that stretch feeling that you get when you can't go any further into a position. This is a really oversimplified explanation, but essentially this is what's happening when we're stretching. Now, as a beginner, when you haven't got used to stretching before, a lot of those initial gains in flexibility actually come from just being able to better tolerate that stretch reflex, that stretch sensation. It is not necessarily a comfortable one. There is an element of discomfort. But a lot of good flexibility practice is about managing that reflex. How do we convince our body not to put the brakes on so early? And that can come through numerous techniques, but also just getting stronger. Strength is usually a great way to convince our body that it's not going to hurt itself. So no, stretching shouldn't be painful. It might be uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be painful. And you certainly shouldn't be forcing yourself into positions. As I said, flexibility works about working with your body. It's about understanding how to get into better positions and increase that flexibility. It's not about just brute force trying to push your way through pain into a position, because that's ultimately how bad things happen. Okay, so that's the first one. How about we're doing all that right? We're doing our flexibility work and we're getting sore from our flexibility work. Is that normal? Excessive unaccustomed activity, strength training, etc., stuff that we're not necessarily used to, can cause exercise-induced muscle damage, which can lead to delayed onset muscle soreness. That sort of feeling you get after training. Now, this is perfectly normal, especially when the stimulus is novel, it's new to you. Expect to be more sore than if you're used to it. Can you get this from flexibility training? Absolutely, because flexibility training encompasses a wide variety of things. And as we discussed in the first point, that stretch feeling, that stretch reflex is actually a muscle contraction, and muscle contractions is going to lead to some muscle damage, especially if we're doing eccentric based stuff. We'll get to that one in a second. But essentially, because flexibility can come in various forms, for example, we can do flexibility work as our traditional strength training. For example, using a Romanian deadlift to improve hamstring flexibility, or as I covered in last week's video, using chest flies to develop chest and shoulder flexibility. This is just normal training at the end of the day with a focus on range of motion. It's going to develop flexibility. It's also going to cause some muscle damage, which is going to cause some delayed onset muscle soreness. Perfectly normal. Then we have things like isometric stretching, such as holding a side split or a front split position in an active position. This is actually going to be a pretty strong muscle contraction, especially if we're gradually lowering to that position. Essentially, we're performing an eccentric quasi-isometric. We've got that eccentric component, that slow lengthening under load. That's going to cause some muscle damage, probably going to cause some DOMS as well. So you can expect to see some soreness from flexibility training, but soreness is not a good measure of how effective a training session is. In fact, it can actually be a measure of if you're doing something wrong as well. So I mentioned at the beginning, novelty, new stimulus. If you're new to flexibility training, if you've been doing it a few weeks, or if you're just doing a new program, a new exercise, then I'd expect to see some soreness. However, if we see recurrent soreness every single session doing the same thing, then it's an indicator that we're not necessarily doing something correctly. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons. Number one, very simply, we could just be doing too much. Now, this could be too much in the session itself. We could be doing 4, 5, 6 sets of of side splits, actually we might get better results with just 2 to 3 sets, for example. Also, are we doing it too often? Are we doing it 3 or 4 times a week? Might we get better progress just doing it once or twice a week? These are some of the basic things that I covered in my how to start flexibility video, which I'll link in the description down below. So just reducing the amount of work you're doing actually will, one, reduce the soreness, but it's also probably going to increase your progress as well. Ultimately, we only get better at what we can recover from. If we're doing too much, we're not going to be able to recover from it. And if we're always sore, that's also going to limit our expression of the flexibility that we have. If we're doing that correct amount of training, but we're still getting really sore, especially in movements like the side split, etc., if we get really sore adductors, this could actually be a sign that we're too weak for the movement that we're doing. As I said, some of these isometric positions, especially in like the front split, the side split, they are intense positions to hold. We're working kind of close to our maximal effort here. Sometimes if those weak links are weak, they're gonna get worked at that much in higher intensity, and therefore we're gonna get that soreness. So actually, you might be better off working on strengthening those weak links, such as the hamstrings, such as the adductors in the side split. Doing some individual work strengthening those, then coming back to doing our isometric stretching, we should see those stretches feel respectively much less sore. And then again, as we get used to the movement, we shouldn't see much soreness from it either. So yes, you can get sore from stretching, much like any other training, but you shouldn't be excessively sore, certainly not all the time. Finally, let's talk about, does stretching reduce that soreness, that DOMS feeling? So a lot of the other things we've talked about today has been more focused around the heavy, the isometric, the loaded, the strength training side of flexibility training. Obviously, we have just the sitting and a stretch, the passive work as well. And a common thing in the fitness industry in general is, do some stretching after your training. It will help reduce your soreness, it will help improve your recovery. Actually, when we go and have a look at the literature, there is a pretty good consensus that stretching doesn't decrease that muscle soreness response. Ultimately, doing some stretching isn't going to reverse the exercise-induced muscle damage that you get from the strength session. It's not going to change that. There is some variation, some minor differences. It's very small improvement in that pain the next day, but we're talking like 1 or 2%. It's not massive in the grand scheme of things. Does that mean stretching after your session is a waste of time? Absolutely not. In fact, I think it's one of the best times to include your flexibility work, is just as a cool down for your training. If you're doing upper body, do some upper body stretches. If you're doing lower body, do some lower body stretches. It's a really simple way to add in flexibility work and just cool down from a session. Just because it doesn't reduce the soreness aspect of things doesn't mean it's a waste of time. There's many, many other benefits of doing some flexibility work. And then likewise, doing some stretching isn't going to be a problem if you are sore. But as we've talked about, that soreness is an indicator of some muscle damage. So really intensely pushing some flexibility work whilst being sore may not lead to the best outcomes. In fact, it's probably just a little bit unnecessary. When we have that DOMS feeling, that soreness feeling, we're actually in a point in the supercompensation. We need recovery. And actually that further stimulus of doing some intense stretching work might actually make us worse rather than better. We'd actually just be better off resting and then doing some work when we are actually recovered. However, this doesn't really apply to like passive chilled out stretching, very much akin to doing sprinting versus going for a walk. So doing the general, the low intensity, the passive stuff when you're sore is not a problem. Just respect the fact that you're sore. It's probably going to reduce the range of motion a bit. You're not going to need to push yourself as much, but you can certainly do some stretching if you want to. But that's kind of it. That's everything that I wanted to chat about when it comes to soreness and flexibility and stretching. I wanted to just cover a few myths, a few common conceptions, some things that are chatted about out in that flexibility space, and hopefully give you a pretty solid and reasonable logical answer to it. That being said, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Have you learned the hard way when it comes to soreness and stretching? I know I certainly have, having recently injured myself. I covered that in an entire video. I'll link that down below. If you just enjoyed this video, you'll also hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. I'd highly appreciate it. Right next to it is also that subscribe button if you want to join the Bodyweight Warrior tribe. Don't miss out on any more future videos on flexibility, handstands, strength, bodyweight training, all of that good stuff. But that's basically been it for this week, guys. Catch you in the next episode. Have a strong week and peace.
Record. Please now, turn it over for the second side. The second side.